Hi guys, this is Max here, back again with another politics video. I am one of the tiniest, fucking smallest YouTubers around. I have 18 subscribers. Recently my videos have been performing terribly, and my highest viewing rate ever was 180 videos. 18, 180 sounds oddly similar, but believe me, it's actually true. Now, nonetheless, I do believe that I can match my qualities and competencies with one of the great election YouTubers such as Let's Talk Elections. Why is that the case? I can match myself with him because I represent actual unbiased facts. I do not take any ad money. I'm doing this all completely 100% for no payment, and I am taking an objective and unbiased look at everything. I have my own political opinions, but I'm looking at the races the way they are. And today we're going to analyze one of the most biased left leaning YouTubers ever. He does have a tendency to sometimes be unbiased, but the thing is, he always trusts the polls too much, and therefore his videos and predictions become inaccurate. However, let's just take a look at what he has to say today.
Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 19th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the United States Senate elections as we head into November, with some very important primaries occurring last Tuesday and some very important ones coming up over the next coming weeks. I thought it would make sense to make my Senate election prediction now, so that way in 2 weeks' time from now, we can reflect on the primaries that occurred, the candidates that were nominated, and what that means for the ultimate composition of the United States Senate. Now,
So far, pretty good. Yeah, he said it very fast and very well.
for a bit of additional context beyond where we are in terms of the Senate races, this is where Joe Biden is nationally.
Alright, that's always a very important thing to pull up, which is the president's approval rating, because if the president's unpopular, their party always does bad in the midterm elections, and if the president's popular, they always do pretty good. So
down about 12 points in terms of approval versus disapproval, rather the disapproval above the approval, in an overall net negative of 12.3% across the entire nation. Now, Joe Biden has been disapproved of more than he has been approved of throughout the entire time of his presidency, but he still serves in a position where his approval rating doesn't seem to be impacting the Democratic Party the same way that
that is a highly disputable claim. I mean, first of all, he's pulling up 538, a website that has historically always, and I mean always, overestimated Democrats. So probably Joe Biden's approval rating is even lower. And saying that the Democratic Party is not really impacted by Joe Biden is a huge mistake, because it has always been, like, going back over a century. If the incumbent president of a party was popular, their party gained seats, and if he was unpopular, they lost seats. National politics and regional politics are not the same, but they're pretty closely tied together. So saying that the Democratic Party is doing well nationally, but their president isn't, is just a huge mistake.
Barack Obama's did, or President Donald Trump's did for the Republican Party. Of course, Joe Biden's negative approval rating does play into the fact that the GOP is now doing better on the national level, but you are not finding a one-to-one vote share between the Biden approval and the Democratic Party's vote share. The Democrats, on the other hand, are doing significantly better than Joe Biden on the congressional ballot. Republicans are only up 2.3%, according to 5.
Again, he's taken those polls at face value, and he shouldn't, because polls are oftentimes extremely misleading. The 2016 and also the 2020 election should have shown us that. And actually, even the 2018 midterms, because the Democrats were overestimated. He basically copy pastes his predictions from polling rates, and that's just not the way how you predict races. You got to look into the candidates, you got to look into national factors, you got to look at the electoral environment. He's taken a too simple approach.
38, when in Joe Biden's approval rating, he is down 12. So you find that
the Democrats are going to lose the national ballot by at least 10. I promise you that right now. No, not even going to lie. No joking. Unless something big happens that gets Joe Biden's approval rating up in heavens.
Republicans are up about 2 points nationwide. Real Clear Politics, which just 2 days ago had the Republican Party at about a 4-point lead nationwide, has seen it reduced down to a 1.9% lead, a 2-point lead, an overall 2-point reduction across the nation in just the...
Real Clear Politics moves a lot up and down all the time. I mean, they're much more accurate than 538, but yeah, I really wouldn't. I'd rather go with the average rather than what the latest polling results are.
Last couple of days, and a lot of this comes as a result of the news about Roe v. Wade being overturned. It's starting to set into the minds of the American voter. And while the decision hasn't been officially made, I do think that it is already starting to take a negative impact on the GOP. I think once...
Now, he's actually making a good point here, but he's not going into depth enough. In theory, the overturning of Roe v. Wade should be a huge morality boost for the Democrats, but the Democrats are not really doing anything about it. They're like not calling the rallying cry to defend abortion rights. They're just like, Joe Biden came out and said a few nice words, and Democrats tried to codify Roe v. Wade, but their vote failed in the Senate. So, to the American voter, I mean the pro-choice voter, it comes off as if they were doing nothing. I mean, I'm not pro-choice, but, like, seriously, the Democrats are not fighting, and that's why they're losing right now. You need to deliver to your base.
The decision is fully made and that it is announced by the United States Supreme Court, you will start to see some significant pushback, especially in the more swing governor's races, where a governor really could determine whether or not abortion is illegal or legal within a state, and where you will find that pro-choice...
A governor can't determine that. If you want to outlaw or legalize abortions within the state, that has to go through the state legislature. We don't have executive dictatorships.
Activists and those who might vote for Republicans or are independent who swing back and forth, who are vehemently pro-choice or at least somewhat pro-choice, might find themselves voting against a candidate that aligns with their political beliefs beyond abortion because this issue is so relevant and so important in this day and age. Because should that decision go through, the 49-year protection that Roe v. Wade established in 73 would be completely gone. The precedent would be completely overturned, and the Supreme Court would allow for abortions to be ruled illegal depending on the states. Returning the power to the states means that many states, the majority of them more than likely, will vote to get rid of the right to an abortion across the state, with very few exceptions, and in many states, no exceptions altogether. And we're also going to keep that in mind, because my last Senate election projection was before the news actually broke. It's crazy to think about, but the news actually only really released about 2.5 weeks ago. That was something that came right at the beginning of the month of May, and it is very, very interesting to see just how the discussion in our nation has really revolved around it.
That is actually a very interesting list to pull up, because if you look at those, all the states that are predominantly in the South, West Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Idaho, and Tennessee, they're all extremely pro-life, and also the Mormon-heavy states like Utah and Idaho are as well, and even Texas, which is more of a swing state, than it used to be, seems to be on the far right when it comes to the abortion discussion in America. However, Missouri, Kansas, Georgia, North Carolina, even Oklahoma, all these states have surprisingly higher, not high, but higher rates that support the right to an abortion, because probably they're more libertarian, actually not. Oklahoma is the one that really surprises me, but yeah, the more moderate the state becomes, the more Democratic it becomes, the more they support abortions. That makes sense. Except for New Mexico, they're surprisingly pro-life, considering the fact how democratic they are.
Yes, we are still talking about healthcare. Yes, we are still talking about COVID. Yes, we are still talking about inflation and gas prices. But we are now also talking about abortion access and abortion rights. Whereas a year...
He should... he's making a very one-sided argument. He assumes that almost all Americans are heavily in support of abortion rights, which is just not true. Most Americans consider themselves moderate on the issue. It's not like they all have their votes swayed into one direction because of one policy. That's just not true.
We weren't. 2 years ago, we weren't. Because it was a 49-year-long precedent that had been established and set, and it was something that most people on the left did not think was going to be completely overturned or reduced down to the states. They thought maybe the Supreme Court would set a bad precedent for their views, but nothing super significant. This is the worst it could have gotten beyond the standard Supreme Court rules abortion is illegal rather than legal. Instead, having this level of access on a state-by-state basis does sort of cut very high up there in terms of one of the worst reactions or one of the worst results of this Supreme Court hearing. So looking at our United States Senate, you are going to find that some states are a bit different than where they were just 2 weeks ago. And there's good reason for that.
Getting interesting.
Keep in mind right now that the Supreme Court and their decision making has a significant impact on the United States, which means that many of these states might be swayed one way or the other depending on the result.
He's basically just repeating the Democratic narrative that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is going to make the country shift to the blue side, which is just not true. A, the Democrats are not really fighting against abortion restrictions, and B, abortion is not the top issue for most voters. Social issues are mostly like a third or fourth. It's the economy stupid, and the economy is doing bad.
As we start over on the West Coast, you're not going to see much change besides Washington becoming likely Democrat would.
That is a very good observation. If I pull this up, the Washington Senate race has had fairly close polling. We'll pull it up. Yeah, Washington was actually within 2 or 4% in 2010, where we had a pretty big Republican wave here, and public policy shows this race to be within 9, which I could very much imagine being the case. It's probably going to be within 10, yep.
That's where it was about a few months, or just 2 weeks ago. Oregon is safe blue. California is safe blue. As we move further and further over into the western part of the United States, we have some safe Republican seats. Idaho, Utah, Alaska, I would also characterize as safe. I am not saying specifically that Lisa Murkowski is safe. These ratings are based off of party ideology. I think in the top 2, you will see it come down between Kelly Tshibaka, the Trump-endorsed GOP candidate, and Lisa Murkowski, the incumbent GOP senator.
Well, at least he's no longer saying Lisa Murkowski is certainly going to win, because there have been polls that showed Tshibaka at over 50%. Murkowski's not popular.
The interesting thing about Alaska is that they use ranked choice voting and a non-primary system. They used to use a primary system. Lisa Murkowski, as the incumbent, lost her primary back in 2010, I believe, and then won her election through a write-in campaign. But for 2022, there are no primaries. They all go to the general, and we will see what happens. But regardless, I think it will end up between 2 Republicans, so the balance of power really doesn't matter.
Also, like Alaska has an open primary system with a 4 contendants runoff in the general election under a ranked choice voting system. So the top 4 people in the first round advance to the general election, and then we have ranked choice voting, which is really, really interesting and actually pretty cool.
Hawaii ends up being safe blue. Moving further across the United States, North and South Dakota I would characterize as safe. Kansas, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's special election, all safe. Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Indiana, no real concern here for the GOP. Kentucky, Indiana, South Carolina, Alabama, already considered to be safe. The Democrats have Illinois, they have Maryland, they have New York, they have Vermont, they have Connecticut. These states make up the...
I wouldn't necessarily say Illinois is going to be safe. I mean, it might be closer than 15 percentage points, because Illinois has trended to the right with Donald Trump's appeal to working class voters. I mean, at least he appealed more to them than other Republicans. However, at the same time, the Republicans have lost ground in the Chicago suburbs. Let's just look up Illinois Senate polling. Ballotpedia just sucks. See if we have any polls here. Sheesh. They don't show any polling here. Yeah, well, I don't find any polling, but definitely
Democratic Party and their deficit to the
is going to be within a likely margin, especially in a red wave year. And Connecticut also might end up being a bit closer. It used to have a lot of Republican senators and governors and the independent Joe Lieberman, but as of right now, the Democrats are definitely going to win it. So I wouldn't just go on him too harsh for saying that they're safe.
GOP, putting them at an equal footing of 45-45, with 10 total toss-up races. Now, in these 10 total toss-up races, I would also have to consider Washington as potentially a toss-up race, because I categorize likely states as toss-ups. Colorado starts out as one of the immediate likely states, and not because I think that it's going to be necessarily winnable on a high extent for the GOP, but more so because I think the margin will narrow down from where it was in 2020. Biden only won Colorado by a likely margin, even though it was 13.5%, which is very impressive for a national Democrat.
I think it's more like going to be a lean margin. You have to keep in mind it's probably going to be a plus 10 Republican environment, so I don't think the Democrats are losing Colorado, but it will definitely be a close one.
It's still a result that doesn't say, it's as blue as Nebraska is red, or Wyoming is red, or Utah is red. Colorado's a pretty Democratic state, but it's 13.5%, and I think in a red wave like 2022, it looks as if that Colorado probably will reduce, but I do think it's going to be somewhere between 5 to 15%, possibly around 9, 10, 11 points. Moving over into the likely Republican states, or at least the other one that I would characterize, the two, actually. Ohio was the first one. Looking at the results in Ohio in the...
All right, now so far his Senate prediction has been pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with any of his margins except for Colorado and maybe Illinois, but not really, so he's making more accurate predictions than last year.
Moving over into, I think that because of this Trump bump that the GOP has gotten in Ohio, they will do very, very well. Even in 2018, when you take a look at the governor election that occurred in the state of Ohio, a blue wave couldn't even turn Ohio blue. It got very close. Richard Cordray was at 47% of the vote, but Mike DeWine, who had lost a statewide election numerous times before, actually, or not numerous times, but had lost a statewide election before, ended up winning the governor's race. Same thing can be applied in Iowa, but
I actually think that governor's elections, just by the way, look a lot like Senate elections used to look like. There are Republicans that perform very well in blue states like Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Their Democrats are performing very well in red states like Kansas and I wouldn't necessarily call any of these other states red states, but there used to be much less of a partisan divide. And even South Carolina was close, and Oklahoma was decently close, so there's still less divisiveness on the gubernatorial level than there's on the national level, which overall is a good thing.
Reynolds defeated Fred Hubble by 2.7%, but she's also not going to be in a pretty competitive position. But we're not talking about her race. We're talking about the state of Ohio. And I think with J.D. Vance's nomination, the Republican Party got the better of the two. It could have been.
J.D. Vance definitely has a much better working class appeal than all these other Democratic candidates. And contrary to what most pundits say, anti-immigration rhetoric goes very well in Ohio because the jobs are going down and many Latin American immigrants just do the lower wage jobs, which makes people feel like that all the Mexicans are taking American jobs away. That's not necessarily the case, but there is certainly there are some jobs that could be filled by Americans that are filled by foreigners. I'm not saying that's a bad thing in a free marketplace society, but I do understand why people are pissed about that. And thus they're going to vote for J.D. Vance, who's tough on borders.
Josh Mandel, the 2012 nominee for U.S. Senate. We can actually take a look at that race going all the way back to the presidential election where Obama won. Let's go ahead and see past elections, 2012. Ohio actually went to Sherrod Brown by about 6 points. In 2018, you fast forward, and the margin was surprisingly enough around the same. It was 6.8% this time against Jim Renacci. Renacci. I'm not entirely sure, actually. I think I'm mispronouncing it both ways because I know
California
someone had corrected me.
What year was that? California, the Senate race was a lean margin. Likely? Oh, yeah. California was a likely margin in 2018 because there were 2 Democrats in the final round, so that makes more sense.
When I said Jim Renacci, and I thanked them for it, but I remember someone also had previously corrected me and told me it was Jim Renacci. I believe Renacci. I think that's how I'm supposed to say it. Hopefully I got that correct. But at the end of the day, the point is just that Sherrod Brown won by 6 points against Josh Mandel. And that was 2012. It was a much more beneficial year for the Democratic Party in Ohio. You saw Obama win the state in 2012. So generally speaking, what the results were a large victory.
Missouri went from being a safe blue state with Claire McCaskill to being a likely red state, so that's impressive.
For the Democrat.
We've become a lot more divisive than we used to be because there used to be Democratic senators in North Dakota, Montana, and there's still one in West Virginia, but it's really amazing how much America has polarized even since 2012, so it's not a good thing. It was nice where you had the ability to have Republicans elected in blue states and Democrats elected in red states, now now that electoral divide we always saw on the presidential level is really also extending to the Senate level. I really like that. Hopefully we're gonna get better.
Party in Ohio. I don't know if that will be the case in 2022, especially considering that the Republican Party lucked out with their nominee. I think that J.D. Vance was the right nominee to vote to run against Tim Ryan. I also just don't think that the environment is beneficial for a Democratic pickup in the state of Ohio. The next likely state is Florida, which pretty much just makes sense. Looking at Marco Rubio, you really never see a change in characterization. Going all the way back to the very first level, very first prediction that I had in the state of Florida, it was always likely red. And I think that is something that I've stuck by, and I think Marco Rubio is going to do very, very well. You take a look at his history, you take a look at where he had done well in the past, you find that Marco Rubio was an exceptional candidate because he won Hispanic voters in the state of Florida on a level that you typically didn't see for a Republican. He won by 7.7%, when, what we found was that Donald Trump in this race won by just 1.34%.
That's probably just because of his awesome name.
So I think that's
Rubio.
something to consider as well. Marco Rubio significantly outperformed Donald Trump in the state of Florida. And I think he very well will outperform Donald Trump's numbers from 2020 in Florida again, especially given this election year. So we're down to the remainder 7 toss-up races, and all of these are going to be characterized by tilt or lean characterizations. Now, I want us to take a look at the approval rating by state for most support for legal abortion across many of these states. And let's talk about them.
Now he's making a big mistake. He's linking support for legal abortion to a Senate race. I mean, of course, abortion is an issue that voters choose their candidates on. But it's not the end-all, be-all. I wouldn't necessarily go like that. Unless Wisconsin has like a ridiculously high rate, 70 or 80% pro-abortion rights, I would not take that as a major factor when considering which party that race is going to go to.
Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, Arizona, and Nevada. So North Carolina comes in at about a +5. Georgia is a +2. So the voters in
Again, I do not even know if these polls are super reliable. There are a lot of swing people in there, so I really don't know.
These 2 states seem to approve of legalized abortion across the state. Wisconsin, +13. Pennsylvania, +13. Arizona, +13. You go further and further, and we're looking for Nevada, +32. New Hampshire, +35. Let's see if we're...
Well, New Hampshire's a more libertarian state. I really don't know about Nevada because there are a lot of Hispanic voters in there. They're more conservative Catholics. Overall, I'd like to say it's interesting to see that Nevada's so far down, but
Forgot a state. Nevada, Arizona covered, Wisconsin, Georgia covered, North Carolina, Pennsylvania covered, New Hampshire. These states seem to be in heavy approval, or at
these polls I don't really trust them.
least some level of approval. None of these states oppose women having mostly the right to an abortion. And I think you find this overwhelmingly in Nevada, overwhelmingly in New Hampshire. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and make the state of New Hampshire a lean blue state.
I wouldn't really say that. New Hampshire does vote based on abortions, but literally living in Vermont, I can tell you, people from New Hampshire, especially northern New Hampshire, are very pissed off about the gas prices. And they usually turn out to vote in droves against the incumbent party. So I wouldn't really agree with the New Hampshire call. I mean, he really makes abortions up to be much bigger of an issue than they actually are, just so he can make the Democrats win.
But there, I don't think likely is going to be the easiest thing to predict or expect, but it definitely could get there, especially if that Supreme Court decision is as harsh and as ill-intended to abortion access as it seemed to have come across.
He's definitely picking a side here. He says ill-intended to abortion access. You know what side that guy's on, man.
As for the state of Nevada, I'm moving this from what was previously, let's go ahead and show you, it was a tilt Republican characterization. It is now a tilt Democratic characterization. That is a flip back to the Democratic Party. The GOP still, I would say, maintains their...
Now, Catherine Cortez Masto is definitely not the guy whom she replaced. What was his name again? Harry Reid, who was a pretty big name senator from Nevada, could never lose, and Catherine Cortez Masto is not too well known. There's a pretty big chance she's going to lose against the former Attorney General, Adam Laxalt, so I wouldn't say Nevada's going to go blue this November.
Level of support in Wisconsin, but loses it slightly. It's a state that approves of abortion access by about 12 to 13 points, so that's something that Ron Johnson is going to have to combat. He is vehemently pro-life and very public about that stance. I also think that our national environment is going to...
Again, you need to have Democrats who actually fight for abortion access in order for that issue to be something that you can campaign on. There's none of them in Wisconsin. There might be candidates that are officially pro-choice, but the opponent running against Ron Johnson and the presumptive Democratic nominee, I believe her name was, what was her name again? I know she's the state treasurer, and her name's Sarah Galuski. She has very little statewide appeal, while Ron Johnson, on the other hand, is a pretty big name, has defeated a person, Ross Feingold, 2 times, even though he was very beloved by the progressive base in Wisconsin. I don't think Ron Johnson's going to lose. He's going to hold on by roughly the same margin as last time.
Considered, and people aren't going to consider abortion to be their number one issue, but I do think that it will,
at least he's acknowledging that,
be at least somewhat significant enough, especially in states like Nevada and New Hampshire, where you're talking about, net plus 30, plus 32 approvals for this procedure. That's where I think it will have the most impact. In Wisconsin, I think it'll narrow it down. I don't think it will be enough for the Democrats to win in the state of Wisconsin at this point in time. For the state of North Carolina, I would say the GOP ends up winning that race. I think overall, Ted Budd was the right nominee. Donald Trump chose the right one. Sherry Beasley, while I think would be strong in another year, 2022 just simply isn't her year. But Pennsylvania, I'm moving over from what was tilt Democrat to now.
Pennsylvania is going to be tilt. Pennsylvania is simply no longer the state it was under the Obama years. And especially voters in rural Pennsylvania are going to come out in droves in order to support a pro-life candidate. However, I would not be surprised if Pennsylvania ends up being a lot less close for the Democrats than we expected. Not because of any abortion issues, but simply because John Fetterman, the Democratic nominee, is a pretty amazing candidate and has great working class appeal.
Lean Democrat. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I think at this point, looking at where the Oz and McCormick situation is, the Republican Party is going to likely draw this on for maybe a few weeks. I also think Fetterman is a strong nominee for the Democratic Party. I know some people have some concerns about his health now that he has a defibrillator installed in his chest, but I do...
Wait, he has a defibrillator? I thought that guy was able to stand in shorts in a snowstorm. He actually did it. Look it up.
I think that is something that the voters won't actually take into consideration super heavily. I think it is maybe present in the minds of many voters. I think what also is in the minds of many voters is both the fact that we do see McCormick and Oz as outsiders from the state of Pennsylvania, and as of Oz's lead right now, I think the GOP also poses a significantly worse chance with Oz as the nominee. But unfortunately for the GOP, he's still maintaining this 1,000, 2,000 vote lead across the state, but we will see if that changes and what a recount will ultimately uncover. So Pennsylvania.
The Pennsylvania GOP primary was a giant mess. I really struggled trying to explain that. And we ended up in a situation where the pro-Trump candidate Barnett got the least votes, followed by the anti-Trump candidate who did very well in the rural parts of the state, which he really shouldn't. And then Oz did best in the urban parts, which are the liberal parts of Pennsylvania, even though he's like the middle of the way candidate. That's kind of complicated. But it's not the end of the game for the GOP in Pennsylvania.
Changing characterizations now more beneficial for the Democratic Party. In addition to Doug Mastriano's nomination, Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman are likely going to but likely to do well in this election this November because of the GOP's inability to nominate strong candidates on both of these top ticket races. The final two...
I wouldn't necessarily say that the nominee for governor in Pennsylvania is going to be bad. I mean, Lou Barletta was more moderate, but yet on the other hand, he would have probably struggled getting high turnout in rural areas. Well, I wouldn't say that in a red wave year, but the candidate that the Republicans ended up choosing, even though he's more conservative for the governor's race of Pennsylvania, he is not a bad candidate. However, I would see why that guy who stood in the state senate and yelled about how we have to overturn the 2020 presidential election might face some heavy attack ads. However, these attack ads about the 2020 election didn't work in the Virginia governor's race. I'm not sure whether they're going to work in Pennsylvania. We'll have to wait and see.
Toss-up seats that I'm going to go ahead and characterize. What do we have? We have the state of Georgia, which I'm going to characterize right now as a tilt GOP state. That's where I had it previously. I think that's where I feel the most comfortable characterizing it. It is also the state that seems to care the least at most about abortion access. It's a +2 positive there across the state. Now, this is polling from, let's go ahead and see, from the Public Religion Research Institute, Pew Research Center, and Guttmacher Institute, or Mocker. But what we find from Georgia is that you're not really seeing an overwhelmingly approval from this crowd, which I think will be difficult to play well across the state. I think that voters might care in Nevada or New Hampshire looking at these numbers, but Georgia, I don't think there will be as much of an impact. And that's also not just that numbers alone. I did see that Subaru USA poll that does show Raphael Warnock up by 5, but it does definitely seem...
Now, in regards to abortion, it is one of those issues that actually African Americans agree with the Republicans on, because black communities do tend to over proportionally oppose abortion access, yet they're still going to vote Democrat. And there are a lot of libertarians that support abortion access, but because of economic issues, they're still going to vote Republican, which I personally believe to be the main issue to say that's going to swing voters. There's not really a lot of people that are going to flip on abortions. And you have to see the only people who are really passionate about abortion rights are really childless young people. So, and young people don't really tend to vote. However, I'd like to say if I said that abortion access would be not an issue at all, I just don't believe that it will sway enough voters one way or another in order to make a major difference. That's my own personal take on this.
Like an outlier, and I also think that based on the overall average and based off of where we are nationally, that Georgia very well could elect Herschel Walker. I don't think he's this out there, completely wrong nominee.
Even though Herschel Walker is not in the Senate as of right now, he has more name recognition than Raphael Warnock because he was the run back for Georgia University. And having been to the South, I can tell you, football is king, especially college football, and you should never underestimate that vote in the South. Never underestimate the football vote. Having a coach or like Tuberville or a player like Walker run, that's really a big card.
The GOP to choose, like I might think for Doug Mastriano or Mehmet Oz, but I think that there definitely can be some mistakes made here.
I think probably Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania. I think he might have bigger chances of winning than Dr. Oz because the Democratic candidate is not really very inspiring. Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General, is not going to get his base to turn out. Well, Doug Mastriano will get high turnout from the Republican base since he's a more conservative candidate than Josh Shapiro is liberal. And especially in the red wave, your motivation of your base matters a lot. It matters who turns out. Is it the Republicans or is it the Democrats? Republicans turn out in red wave years, Democrats turn out in blue wave years. It depends on the incumbent. So I believe Doug Mastriano probably has a good chance to win in Pennsylvania due to higher red turnout.
Which is why it's only a tilt Republican characterization. And the final state that I'm going to characterize is the state of Arizona.
One thing ahead, even though I am definitely a more conservative person, I am not going to lie and say that I endorse the Republican for Arizona. I love Mark Kelly. He's a great senator. He served our nation as an astronaut. And most importantly, he does not take any donations from big corporations or super PACs. He only lives off small dollar donations. Great shout out to Mark Kelly. If all senators were like that, corruption would be almost gone from our politics. So go, if you're in Arizona, go out and vote for Mark Kelly.
Now, this actually changes the track record of my Senate predictions. For the past couple of months, since Joe Biden became unpopular across the United States, it became more apparent that the Democratic Party was going to lose control of the United States Senate. They weren't doing well across many of these states. Moving further and further throughout the months, it became more difficult for me to see how the Democrats were going to come back. But over the past few months, they have started to do so. In my prediction before the Roe v. Wade leak came out, the Democratic Party was actually only losing by 1 seat. The GOP doesn't seem to be in the strongest position in Pennsylvania. That is now...
Again, the polls didn't even shift after the leaked decision of the Supreme Court. Maybe if the Supreme Court actually ends up overturning it, there could be a slight shift, but I really got to see that so far. And there's simply not enough evidence that points into the direction that people are going to care a lot about abortion. And that's really the main criticism that I have of this video. Overall, his prediction makes sense. His predictions made a lot of sense throughout the year, but they no longer do now if he takes abortion and social issues in general as a major factor. Because as time has shown over and over again, people don't really vote on social issues. People didn't really care about Black Lives Matter when they headed to the polls in 2020. It seemed like that'd be a giant issue. The Biden campaign ran not necessarily a woke campaign, but Democrats, especially right after the killing of George Floyd, were heavily pro defund the police. They shifted away from that later on. And Donald Trump ran like a tough law and order campaign, and it also didn't really play off for him. So people don't really vote on social issues. People vote on the economy, and that's what you should base your prediction on. Not really on what people think about a minor issue that doesn't really get a whole lot of attention usually.
And confirmed by Tuesday primaries. The leak reaffirms the Democratic Party's chances in Nevada, in New Hampshire. The state of North Carolina wasn't really in much consideration for Democrats. Neither was Ohio, Florida. Wisconsin seems to be within the realm of possibility, but one has pretty much stuck with them since the very beginning, and that is the state of Arizona. Now, with this characterization, I am moving Arizona into the lean Democratic column. I also do think...
Now, no matter how much I like Mark Kelly, I do not think Democrats are going to win in Arizona. Because, if we're being honest here, Arizona had a pretty big despise for Donald Trump. But that was mostly because of his lack of appeal in the suburbs. If you run basically any candidate in Arizona who's not Donald Trump and doesn't completely fuck it up like Martha McSally, they're probably going to win.
That based off of where we are right now, that Arizona could be quite a surprise. While Wisconsin and Arizona share a very similar number when it comes down to abortion access and abortion approval, one has a Democratic incumbent and one does not. And while I don't think that it was enough to sway Wisconsin from what was a lean Republican characterization, I did think it would narrow it down. Arizona is a tilt Democrat.
I really like Mark Kelly. I hope he wins. But I don't think he does. Because Arizona, at heart, is still a conservative state. A moderate conservative state, but it is a conservative state. And if there has ever been a single policy that Republicans, whether moderate or radical, always could agree on, is that it wanted low taxes and they were pro-life. And I believe it'll be the same thing around this time. If Mark Kelly had a longer precedent of being in the Senate, the incumbent factor would matter a lot. But he's only been in there for not even 2 years, so it's probably not going to be enough to get him over the finish line. But we'll have to wait
A characterization, and I think it will move the same way by a very similar amount, except it was already a Democratic victory. The result of this is that I expect right now the Democratic Party, at least, to somewhat maintain control of the United States Senate. And it's crazy to me that I'm even seeing this as a possibility.
No, and no again. The Democratic Party is not gonna maintain the Senate. And you know why? Because it's going to be a red wave year. His predictions of individual races make sense. However, he needs to consider that Joe Biden is just below the ocean floor in terms of his approval. And it's dropping even further. And the dissatisfaction of the incumbent president can sway a lot of voters' minds when they head into the ballot box and think about Republican or Democrat. They'll think about, which party has done more for me recently? And when they will think about Democrats not delivering at all, they're almost certainly going to vote Republican. And when they think about the inflation number, they're going to vote Republican. It was the same thing in 2018. When they headed into the ballot box, they thought about what the president's most recent accomplishments were, and it was mostly mean tweets. So they voted Democrat. In 2018, that was the case. This time it'll be with inflation. His prediction is not accurate. And especially it doesn't make sense how he says Washington is going to be close and how it's going to be a red wave here, but how somehow miraculously Democrats are going to win all those races. We're not in a situation anymore where individuality and the candidate's own merits matter as much as national energy. The only state where I could see a Democratic incumbent being powerful, established, and persuasive enough to win, despite it being a red wave year, is Pennsylvania. But overall, Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, these states are all going to go Republican. North Georgia will go by a comfortable margin. So will Wisconsin. He really just tried as hard as he could to find any scenario that would at least give Democrats the Senate. But it's not going to happen. It's just the way it is.
And where we are. I think it is equally possible for the generic ballot to be a Republican plus 2.3% victory and Democrats to win control of the Senate, because the map is the most beneficial map the Democratic Party could have had for this election cycle. They're not defending that many seats, and the largest majority the GOP could get would be 54 to 46. Same
That's not a terribly small majority, to be honest, but
thing for the Democratic Party. Democrats lucked out in Pennsylvania's primaries. They are already doing well in Colorado. This leak benefits them in Nevada and New Hampshire.
it does not. It's like, seriously, people don't care about social issues, but I've said that over and over again. I'll let this dude lobber.
Makes voters here more willing
I'll let this dude parlay. Sorry.
to back a Democratic nominee, because they very well could have and probably did in the past, but might have been unwilling to because they don't necessarily like Joe Biden. Well, they might put that aside for such a hotly contested issue that they seem to be very unified across the entire state. And I think Mark Kelly, with the incumbency factor and this slight bump, this slight resurgence to give Democratic and liberal-leaning voters a reason why they should vote rather than just being this party against me.
Again, good point. But Biden's not fighting for abortion access. The Democrat Party is not fighting for it. They're as indefinite as they possibly could be in terms of their actions.
Is Donald Trump's party, giving them a reason to vote for something is also something that could be considered a very big bump, or at least swaying the electorate in one direction or the other. So for right now, I am very shocked that I'm even saying this, but I do think the Democratic Party right now has a better chance at retaining Senate control than losing it. I think they could very well mess up. They've done so in the past. They started out this election cycle with a very good chance at retaining control. In fact, at one point, I expected them to gain 2 seats in the United States Senate in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But now it's becoming harder to see. But I think maintaining 50 to 50 becomes more realistic following the leak from the United States Supreme Court. So thank you guys so much for watching this video.
Alright, now overall, I would like to say he ignores the biggest fact, which is that we have a bad economy and an unpopular incumbent president. However, he's trying to at least use unbiased language, which I appreciate, but again, he's ignoring the biggest factors, the incumbent president's unpopularity, and he's by far overstating the impact that the abortion debate has on this race. Historically and currently, what has always been the biggest contributor to whether an incumbent party did poorly or well in a presidential election year, the biggest contributor has always been the economy and the incumbent president. Social issues do matter, but they matter to a fairly small group of people. There are a small group of libertarians that probably vote on guns. There are a small portion of liberals that vote on, like, abortion and stuff. But in general, I would like to say that people vote on the economy, especially folks that are not so much into politics overall. And therefore, it's going to be a red wave year. And because it's going to be a red wave year, a lot of races that individually should be very competitive or even favorable to the Democrats are going to be swayed along with that wave into the Republican column. And that's the overall criticism of him. He doesn't really look at pictures in the broader frame. He just looks at the individual races, then picks out a certain issue, thinks how the state stands on that issue, and then says the state's going to vote like that. You can't just go like that. You need to take multiple issues into consideration and look at the broader frame. He does not. And that's why Let's Talk Elections is not a good election YouTuber. And why many small YouTubers who do not have a crowd of followers that is either left-leaning or right-leaning oftentimes make more accurate predictions because they don't have to feed into the narrative of their base. They can make actually good and unbiased predictions. And that's what I'm going to do on my channel this week. And we're going to have a good and fine election prediction for the U.S. Senate based on all issues being taken into consideration. Now, this has been one of my longest videos, for God's sake. It's been a while, but I hope you guys liked it. and I hope you're going to leave a thumbs up. Have a good day. Max out. Bye-bye.